Okay, thank you to our audience filing in. Welcome everyone to Ammonia Energy Live, our monthly series where we explore the wonderful world of ammonia energy and the role it'll play in global decarbonisation with an Australian twist. I would like to begin this event by acknowledging our traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne, and I extend my acknowledgement out to Mandan-Dangi country in southwest Queensland, where our speaker is based, and to country wherever you are in Australia or around the world. Today we're looking at the decarbonisation journey of an Australian-based energy company, Origin, and what role hydrogen and ammonia have played in that and will play going forward. Join us to explore this is Sarah Tincknell, Stakeholder and Regulatory Manager in the Future Fuels Division at Origin. Sarah's based in Roma, southwest Queensland. She'll be interviewed by Emily Heenan, Process Engineer and also a member of the Future Fuels Division at Origin, and Jacinta Backer, Senior Research Coordinator at Jupiter Ionics. We encourage you guys to submit questions during the webinar via the questions box in your go-to menu. We'll try to answer as many of these as we can in some short Q&A at the end of the session. And just a reminder that all recordings of these events for Ammonia Energy Live live on our YouTube channel. Just search for Ammonia Energy Live or AEA Australia and make sure to subscribe once you're there. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Sarah. Sorry, to Emily.
Thank you, Julian. That's okay. Well, welcome, Sarah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Origin and why they're interested in ammonia?
Sure, thanks, Emily. Before I answer that, I'd also like to acknowledge that today, because I'm far from home, I'm actually coming to you from Gadigal country, and that is what Europeans refer to as Sydney. I'd also like to recognise that it's Reconciliation Week, and on Tuesday it was National Sorry Day. And I acknowledge our stolen generations, their grief, loss and trauma, and I acknowledge those who made it home and those whose lives were lost. So why are we interested in ammonia? For those of you that do know Origin, you might be a customer, for example. You might be surprised to see us pop up in the ammonia space, but it actually does make sense. And in a long-winded way, I will explain why. So Origin is an integrated energy company, and what that means is that we have business activities spanning gas exploration and production, electricity generation, wholesale electricity and gas trading, domestic and export sales, a growing renewables portfolio. We have got over 4 million retail customers. We deliver 30% of the East Coast gas supply, as well as exporting 9 million tonnes of LNG per annum. So we've got a lot going on. And all of that means that we have got experience in large-scale electricity agreements, renewables development and renewables investment, complex project delivery and asset management, and we're familiar with export markets, customers and supply chains. And if you think about it, that's kind of all the things that are relevant for ammonia as energy. So that's why we think we can do it and why we are interested in it. But then the question is, why would we do it? And it all comes down to decarbonisation. So many people listening to this seminar would recognise that decarbonisation has been front and centre as the world looks to recover from COVID-19, and momentum is accelerating. For example, the Global Hydrogen Council's February report noted that hydrogen is being considered as a key pillar of decarbonisation efforts globally, with over 30 countries releasing hydrogen roadmaps. And even though I talk about hydrogen, ammonia still is a contender in that mix. We all know that it's a tried and tested carrier. We know it can be used by electricity utilities without the crackback. I'm sure a number of people listening today are aware of JERA's 20% co-firing of ammonia into coal-fired units in Japan. So ammonia has a real place to play in the hydrogen story that we're hearing globally. In that February report that I mentioned, there was more than 200 projects that had been announced, and governments worldwide had pledged $70 billion US, that's billion with a B, in funding for decarbonisation and clean energy. So the world wants clean energy and it wants it fast. And we want to offer clean energy solutions to our customers both here and overseas, which is why it makes sense for Origin to be talking about this space.
Thanks for that summary, Sarah. For those of us that don't know you so well, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your personal motivations in the decarbonisation space?
Sure, Jacinta. I don't necessarily like talking about myself, but you know, I come from a mixed background of experience. I'm not an engineer. I've worked mainly in the agriculture and environmental space, but at the core of my experience is science. And so decarbonisation makes sense to me because it's based on science. Working across agriculture and environmental disciplines has given me a real perspective on how vital climate is. So not only to natural ecosystems, but also to food and fibre production. It relies so heavily on climate and climate variables. I mean, we're really good at producing food in this country, and you know, it's an industry that provides lots of jobs and brings in lots of money. But climate extremes can make that more difficult, and they can make a number of industries in Australia, put a number of industries in Australia at risk. And working across sectors has also given me an appreciation of interconnectivity and this concept of indirect impacts. And what I mean by that is an activity or an action from one actor over here impacts someone over there. So me using fossil fuels here causes sea level rise over there. And I think this is actually where climate change commentary can really struggle. If it's not immediately affecting me, I don't have to deal with it. But having lived and worked in regional Australia my whole life, I've seen firsthand the impacts of extreme weather events. And for me personally, with the global appetite for change and this wall of money that we're seeing coming into the energy transition, I see a really great opportunity right now to accelerate decarbonisation, particularly in the hard to abate industries. And that's where a product like ammonia has a really key role to play. And I really hope we don't waste this opportunity.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for sharing that personal insight. Let's talk about Origin's decarbonisation journey. Action on emissions and climate that was seen as radical just a few years ago is now normal. Where does Origin see the level of ambition rising in the coming years?
Yeah, it's a great question. So how high can reduction ambition go? How long's a piece of string, to be honest? We're seeing our major trading partners set ambitious climate targets and pursue urgent action. You know, if you think about Japan, along with many European nations, have pledged net zero by 2050. In fact, Germany has just brought that forward by 5 years, and now they're targeting 2045. China's aiming for 2060. You know, we're seeing our customers and their customers demanding low carbon products, including ammonia. And it's our belief that energy producers who not only reduce their direct emissions, but also find ways to abate their customers' emissions are going to have a competitive advantage. You know, as little as 2 years ago, the concept of the world's major oil and gas companies embracing a low emissions future would have been inconceivable. Yet here we are today, we've got Shell, BP, Total, Equinor. They've all declared net zero ambitions, as has the American Petroleum Institute. In fact, the CEO of BP has stated he's transforming what has been an oil company for over 100 years into an integrated energy company, which I find really fascinating, personally, working in an integrated energy company already. You know, Shell is a major player in offshore wind and hydrogen development in Europe. And the list goes on and on about, you know, traditional energy ambitions shifting to decarbonisation. At Origin, we've made it clear that our aim is to be net zero by 2050. And we are intensely customer focused. And so for us, it's vital that we are demand led. And demand for decarbonised energy, including ammonia, initially comes from states, countries and sectors where there are government or policy driven targets and intervention. This early demand enables investment in the early commercial scale projects, which will be the fastest way to bring the cost of equipment down the learning curve in time to meet increasing demand. So when you ask me about the kind of timing of ambition, all reports agree that demand booms in the 2030s. But if we want to be a leader in this space, then we have to build those long-term relationships. It means including off-takers in our projects, learning from them, and rather than just producing a commodity and putting it onto the market. And it means working with early customers for whom hydrogen or ammonia is a key part of their decarbonisation strategy. We have to have people who are willing to take an early punt with offtake from the 2020s. I don't actually know how high the ambition will go. So when we think about meeting it, we're approaching it in 3 ways. We're looking at reducing the emissions from our current operations and designing them out of our future operations. Removing carbon from the atmosphere. I mean, how do we become a carbon consumer? We're reimagining the products and services we provide our customers. So therefore, no matter how high the ambitions for climate action go, we have the right fundamentals in place to meet it.
It sounds very promising. And to dig a bit deeper into that, the marine sector's significant emission reduction ambitions are a driving force behind the uptake of ammonia energy solutions. So where is the inspiration for the energy sector, and where will that IMO-style 50% cut by 2050 come from?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about where those drivers are going to come from for this kind of decarbonisation agenda. And I truly think it's going to come from customers. I don't think in Australia that we will see a mandated carbon restriction on gas, for example, or anything actually, anytime soon. That would be paramount to a carbon price, which all sides of politics seem to have an aversion to. However, to be fair, a number of states have stated renewables and emission reduction targets, but I think it really will be market-driven, not policy-driven. And if we think about what is driving that agenda globally, it's decarbonisation commitments and ambitions of energy users and investors. You know, we're seeing it from financial backers, insurance companies, that kind of thing. And these drivers are just as relevant to gas as they are to any other future fuel source. As I mentioned before, we've made it really clear that our aim is net zero by 2050, as have a number of other local gas producers. And quite interestingly, I've just spent the last day and a half at the Australian Hydrogen Conference, and there's been a number of presentations there from particularly gas network providers who understand that decarbonisation is the direction that business is going in, and that they need to pivot and shift into that space. So focusing on reducing our current emissions and reimagining our products to create low and zero carbon energy is going to occur regardless of any external targets that might come into the market at some point in the future.
Thanks, Sarah. Like you said, sounds like there's a big push and drive to get, you know, hydrogen and ammonia as, you know, renewable fuels. What puts Australia in front of other big potential hydrogen and ammonia exporters?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that we ask ourselves a lot as a country, and you know, the government asks it, and we've built strategies around this. But the reality of it is probably not much, and that might seem a bit pessimistic. But what I mean is we've got a window of opportunity, but it's ours to squander. You know, Australia's already announced a strategy to be a world leader of export of hydrogen/ammonia by 2030, and I quite often use hydrogen and ammonia interchangeably. So if you hear ammonia when I'm talking about hydrogen, I could be meaning ammonia. But what puts us in front at the moment is that we have great renewable resources. We've got strong existing trade relations within the region. We've got customers in Asia with an appetite for products, and we've got a track record of reliably exporting commodities and energy. Australia produces 500% more energy than it consumes, you know, so we know how to export energy, but we're not alone in this ambition. So just to name a few, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Canada, Russia, they all have plans to produce and export hydrogen carriers, including ammonia, and this list will just keep on growing. So, you know, there's a world of difference between announcing ambitions or commencing a feasibility study and moving ahead with a commercial viable project. Of the 63 projects announced in Australia, just 13 are operational or under construction, and they're all pilot or demonstration scale. Yet we've set an ambition for ourselves to be world leading exporters of hydrogen by 2030. That's less than 10 years away. And our export partners are looking for commercial quantities even earlier than that. If Australia wants to be a leading exporter by 2030, we need to be producing and exporting well over 500,000 tonnes of hydrogen, and that's hydrogen, not ammonia, by then. And if all of that's renewable, that's 5 to 10 gigawatts of electrolyser capacity online and operating, not to mention the associated renewables capacity that needs to be built to support that, and then the back-end ammonia plants to convert that hydrogen. So each one of those type of scale projects, from renewable development to hydrogen production to hydrogen conversion to transport, has realistically got a 4 to 7 year lead time, which means those projects would have to start now. So while we definitely have an opportunity and an advantage and things that put us in front, it's far from a guaranteed outcome.
Sounds like a big challenge that we need to grab with both hands. Do you think that green hydrogen and green ammonia is the way to go from the outset?
Yeah, thanks, Jacinta. We actually like to use the term renewable, I was about to say Jacinta. We like to use the term Jacinta hydrogen. We like to use the term renewable rather than green. And the reality is, to meet customers' needs by producing renewable, low or zero carbon alternatives to replace their current fossil fuel demand means it's not an either or answer. I mean, our ambition is to supply renewable hydrogen and ammonia from the outset, but we recognise that the demand for low or zero carbon products cannot necessarily all be met by renewable inputs in the timeframes the market is looking for, particularly if they're looking for it in the mid-20s. However, I was listening to the Bloomberg presentation yesterday at the Australian Hydrogen Council, and they stated green will be on price parity with blue within a decade, and that ramp is too short to attract significant investment in blue projects. So it'd be really interesting to see how that kind of plays out. As I mentioned before, I mean, for Australia to be exporting 500,000 tonnes of hydrogen by 2030 and make it all renewable, and that being an additional 10 gigawatts of electrolyser capacity in 9 years, is that realistic? If non-renewable blue steps into the gap, the key is making sure that that hydrogen and ammonia is the lowest carbon footprint possible, and that the measures used to decarbonise these products are credible. For example, offsets in line with the science-based target initiatives. Blue still has some significant challenges in carbon abatement as well. But we accept that there needs to be a toolbox approach to achieve renewable, low and zero carbon energy solutions. Really what we need, though, is a defined transition to an entirely renewable solutions over time.
Great. What do you think are some of the key things that a successful certification scheme needs?
Certification is such a hot topic. Lots of people are talking about it, and the reason is because it's actually really important, right? It needs to be, and at the heart of it, it needs to be able to provide our customers with assurance in the product that they're buying meets their needs. At the end of the day, assurance is actually about customer needs. And some customers are interested in buying renewable products. Others are just interested in understanding the carbon footprint. But transparency and assurance around what the product is really where certification comes in. And as many people who are listening to this would know, in Australia it's being led by the federal government, and they're well underway working with key markets on a domestic scheme that will align to international expectations. They're doing this through the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, for somebody who wants a really short name for something. And that's a group of about 22 countries that are looking at how do we actually get international alignment for a scheme. But there's urgency, right? We've got project proponents who are close to making significant investment decisions on projects, but they can't do that without knowing that their product will fit the expectations of what is renewable, for instance, or without knowing if their power or offset strategies will meet future requirements. Having uncertainty in the future makes it really difficult to make significant financial investment decisions. Likewise, from the customer side of it, where customer demand is going to be driven by international policy settings, customers will need to be able to prove that their product meets whatever the needs of the decarbonisation agenda of the country that they're operating in. And they might not be able to commit to offtake without having that clarity of products that will meet their needs. So, for example, in Japan, will all ammonia be treated as a renewable fuel if it's pushing coal out, or only that's produced from renewable hydrogen? These are all the types of questions that we're thinking about when we're thinking about why we need a certification scheme and why we need it with urgency. And without having that clarity, it really does leave projects open to a great deal of additional risk. And so this is on top of risks around early scaling of technology, untested supply chains, untested consumer sentiment about products. So what do we think should be in a certification scheme? We think that it initially needs to include whether the hydrogen used for ammonia is produced from renewable or fossil fuels. We think it needs to identify what the gross and net carbon footprint is on a well-to-gate basis. And we think it needs to identify what form of carbon abatement has been taken if it's used, for example, in a product that you would maybe call blue. And the clarity is really critical for customers in trusting the Team Australia brand. I think we need to get behind a single internationally agreed scheme. There's a risk that fragmentation into a proliferation of minor schemes, different brands, different approaches actually dilutes product certainty early on in a market like this.
So leading on from certification, because you need to be able to certify it to export it, right? So export is a big focus. But how do regular Australians stand to benefit from the rapid increase in renewable hydrogen and ammonia production capabilities?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jacinta, and it's one that in my role in stakeholder and regulatory, I think about this often. You know, export is shining and exciting, but at the end of the day, you know, how do we actually bring the benefit to Australia? And at Origin, we obviously have a large existing domestic customer base. I mentioned before, we've already got over 4 million retail customers. And so for us, the opportunity to bring low and zero carbon energy products to these customers is just as important as building the export opportunity. But there's a reason we focus on export, and that's that export demand exists today. So there's a pull from international customers and countries for Australian renewable ammonia. And on the domestic side, we need to build that demand. And the link is clear for us, is that securing large-scale export demand, it enables you to de-risk projects and it enables you to justify investment in large-scale infrastructure. Scale brings the cost per kilo down, and it enables us to build a domestic demand without the old chicken and the egg thing. You know, most people will know that you can't, if you don't have the supply, how do you build the demand? If you don't have the demand, why would you invest in the supply? So this is where export can actually really help leapfrog into the domestic space. So we can say not only to domestic customers, but also to potential hydrogen and ammonia enabled adjacent industries, by this time, there'll be this amount of product available at this price, which really helps de-risk domestic investment decisions. One of the real challenges with domestic hydrogen and particularly will be renewable ammonia is the price per kilo at small scale. So in parallel to building our export plans, we look to work with local customers to build hydrogen and ammonia ecosystems and supply chains, and bringing every piece of that puzzle together to help those customers, those domestic customers, find their way through the energy transition is a really important part of how we think about our export ambitions.
Really good point, Sarah. I guess as you were saying, you know, got a lot of development, a lot of ideas with, you know, building these green ammonia and hydrogen plants, and obviously community acceptance is obviously something important to Origin. Can you tell me how you are thinking about getting community members on board with the scale of development that is needed to meet Australia's green hydrogen and ammonia ambitions?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. A matter that's close to my heart. I'll try not to wax lyrical too much about this. But I really think that the importance of community and consumer acceptance in this space cannot be underestimated. And I think about it in two ways. So I think firstly, there's large-scale development of hydrogen ammonia is by its nature industrialisation. You know, so this makes me think about host communities and impacts directly related to development. The second part of it, when we think about these products, is actually consumer acceptance on new types of energy. You know, fuel cell vehicles, having products in their homes and that they're using every day that they're not used to. I think for ammonia, at the stage that we're at currently, it's really about the first element, which is community acceptance of that industrialisation element. And if we think about industrialisation, every large project will require the building of production and storage plant of some sort, most likely a pipeline, most likely high voltage power lines and substations, and maybe a port development. In addition, in order to service the electricity demand that we talked about before, the 2030 ambition, for renewable hydrogen and ammonia, there's going to have to be further wind, solar, and maybe hydro, along with large-scale transmission infrastructure. And all of this activity has to happen in somebody's backyard. Somebody has to be impacted by this development. Really interestingly, current research shows that there's a low level of public awareness of ammonia as an energy. There's neutral to positive responses to the development of the hydrogen industry, but support for industry is correlated with knowledge. So a neutral stance is actually correlated with a lack of knowledge. The more people learn about something, then maybe less supportive of it they are. And that research also shows that independent sources of information, e.g. government, even people like the Ammonia Energy Association, are more trusted than proponents. Proponents and people who are wanting to do projects have obviously seen to have a particular agenda for wanting to develop something. And so what all that means is that while at the moment it might seem like sentiment is neutral or positive, as projects develop and people learn more, sentiment can shift. And of course, ammonia has the added layer of incidents like Beirut to overcome. You know, it was quite interesting when that incident occurred. Some of the first feedback I got when talking to some of the stakeholders was, well, you know, what does that mean? And you know, what risk does that pose when you're looking at large scale ammonia projects? And I think in this case, it's similarly to the climate change experience I talked about before, where action here causes impact there. In this case, it's actually the reverse, where the impact here, industrialisation, actually creates a benefit there. So reduce CO2 emissions in some other part of the world. And so when I think about community acceptance, I really think the key is about shared value for those impacted communities and then education more broadly. And in our experience in Origin, we actually think we do quite well in our host communities. Where we could do better is with the general public. In host communities, we're present locally, we make personal connections, and we can educate in an organic way. You know, we work really hard at building trust through partnerships and shared experiences. It's not always easy, but Origin considers that this is an essential element of doing business, and I don't see that any differently going into a new form of energy. Those removed from host communities can quite often perceive impact like industrialisation of a landscape, but they don't really feel like they experience any benefit. And so in the absence of information, they will look to fill the void. And so I think this is where education is really a key to community acceptance. And I think this is where groups like the AEA have a pivotal role in facilitating that education. And those of us that have developed things before know that low levels of sentiment around developments can absolutely impact the rate and scale of growth. So again, before when I was talking about that opportunity, part of that, us realising the opportunity is making sure that we take our communities along the journey with us. I see my role as working with industry bodies and governments to ensure that education collateral is developed and that education of the general public is being undertaken along with the work that we would be doing in host communities as proponents.
That sounds great, that you're looking after the host communities. It's a big concern of mine. But how is getting the community acceptance any different to getting consumers on board with the low or zero carbon energy products such as renewable ammonia?
Yeah, thanks, Jacinta. And I mean, there's a reason why I split them in two. I think the consumer side of it, and that activity that I mentioned above will actually really help to address the consumer acceptance of these types of products as well. at the end of the day, it all boils down to trust. And for consumers, making sure that we're producing products that consumers want. So if you think about, a robust certification scheme, the product is what it says it is. Engaged and included host communities so that that the product you're consuming, comes from a community that's engaged with that and benefits from it. And widespread education about ammonia, so you understand, what if you have any concerns with the product, you're educated and you can actually understand any of those concerns. All of that is what builds trust. Interestingly, with consumers, you would go, well, cost is important, but I think there's established examples of premiums on green energy in retail. And so I think for me, when I think about this industry and the opportunity we have, it's more about introducing the new products in a really deliberate way, and how then we can help consumers achieve their own personal decarbonisation ambitions. Because if we bring this all back to decarbonisation, we talked about global decarbonisation, but consumers also have personal decarbonisation ambitions as well.
Great. Thank you so much for giving us your time today, Sarah. I know as part of being part of the Future Fuels team that you're in, I've definitely learnt some new insights over the last half an hour. But as a last insight, can you share what Origin finds valuable about being an AEA member and what the wider AEA network can do to help accelerate this energy transition?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I actually have quite a bit to do with AEA, and I really enjoy participating and engaging with that group. I think for me, why Origin, what we gain from being in the AEA is really the connection to like-minded projects and proponents and people, but also really insights into how we collectively and collaboratively can actually progress this industry and these opportunities. As I said before, it's a big ask to actually achieve some of these ambitions, and we're not going to be able to do it on our own. We need groups like the AEA to help us in the education piece, in the advocacy piece, helping us set standards and collaborate on things like certification. So for me, it's really about the collective effort, brainpower, and kind of ambitions all moving in the same direction, and that's really the benefit that we get out of the AEA is having that connection into that type of group.
Great, thanks, Sarah.
And I would encourage anybody who's listening who's not a member to become a member.
100% agree with that. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Sarah, Jacinta and Emily. Great discussion. We'll go through a few quick Q&A and then we'll finish up. Pre-submitted question from Abenita Blunden. You've talked about how Asian markets and economies are moving towards renewables and net zero. How does Origin fit into that Asian space, Sarah?
Well, we would like to fit in as a supplier of green hydrogen and green ammonia, but the most logical way for us to fit into that space is by supplying, low and zero carbon energy. I think maybe this question is in relation to LNG because we're already operating in that space in Asia. And if that is the case, a low carbon LNG is absolutely something we think about. But I guess this is why I was talking in terms of decarbonisation and not just a particular product stream. Because if you look across the opportunity for decarbonisation in the energy landscape, there's a whole range of different types of product streams that you can look to be introducing into your business.
Wonderful. Brian Shaw asks about whether Origin is interested at all in ammonia as a vehicle fuel.
It's a great question. To be honest, I actually think vehicle manufacturers are going to drive the timing and the ambition on this. As it is, Australia is already experiencing problems getting fuel cell trucks and buses landed here. And these are already widely used in places like Europe and the US, as opposed to ammonia land transport, for example. And I think the other thing is with engine manufacturers focusing on marine for ammonia and hydrogen fuel cell developments, I don't think ammonia for transportation land transportation is particularly something that we're going to be seeing anytime soon. So our focus is probably earlier tranches of opportunity than that.
You spoke a little bit about JERA and the coal co-combustion plans. Question from me, is there any interest in power generation from ammonia at Origin?
Yeah, it seems like something that would be a natural fit, but we're not looking to be a first mover here for large scale generation. I mean, there are definite opportunities in remote power for fuel cells, but if you think about Australia's energy landscape for electricity generation, we have opportunities that are not necessarily available to other countries. So we've got renewable capacity and we've got storage options to address the variability in renewables in Australia. So I think that we would look to JERA and the Japanese technology providers to do the early work around ammonia in coal-fired generation facilities, and then we would absolutely leverage off that down the track if we saw an opportunity to do so.
Cool, lovely. And a final question from Scott Ryle. Is this an opportunity for Origin to move into provision of energy markets where they haven't traditionally been, so i.e. liquid fuels provision?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting question, and we do have a part of our business that's also called growth, and that's really about, you know, what other opportunities are there out there in this kind of energy. And when we talk about energy, it's, you know, energy is quite a broad term. So yeah, absolutely. We as part of innovation and changing our business and refocusing what we do, that would be something that we would think about.
Lovely. I might wrap it up there, but thank you very much for answering those questions, Sarah, and for giving us your time and the content. Thank you very much to Emily and Jacinta for interviewing. That wraps up this month's episode of Ammonia Energy Live. Thank you very much to our live audience for coming along, and thank you to presenters and interviewers. Coming up next month, we've got Hydrogen Utility, or H2U. They've been in the news consistently in 2021, multiple project announcements and a new recent partnership with German energy giant RWE. Green ammonia export from Australia is a big part of H2U's future plans, and next month we want to explore what some of them look like. So please mark it in your diaries, Thursday 24th of June at 2 p.m. AEST. Everyone who registered for this event will get a registration link for next month into their inboxes, and we'll promote it through our usual channels. We hope you can attend. So thank you very much to Sarah, Emily, and Jacinta, and we'll see you next month at Ammonia Energy Live. Thank you.
Thanks.